A Podcast One production.
Jenny Cooney has been a part of Hollywood for 30 years, reporting on all the Aussie stars, from Hogues to the Hemsworths, Hugh Jackman, Nicole Kidman, Margot Robbie and beyond. This is Aussies in Hollywood.
So I've known SimonBaker since about 1996 when he first arrived in LA with his wife, actress Rebecca Rigg, and their baby daughter Stella. I was so excited to see he immediately got this big movie role in LA Confidential, and then he scored 2 Golden Globe nominations for both his TV shows, The Guardian and, of course, The Mentalist, which was a big hit all over the world. I was really excited to catch up with him again, especially now that he is a talented filmmaker who directed his first movie, Breath, based on the Tim Winton novel. And I got to go back to the home he still owns in Santa Monica, even though he is living back in Australia, so that I could sit down and have a chat with him. And the home in Santa Monica is where I used to drive past many years ago and throw bags of Australian passion fruit over his security fence, because apparently I was the only person who had an Australian passion fruit vine that produced fruit. Everybody else has produced flowers. So Simon and Rebecca were always grateful when I could throw them over the fence and text them to go get them. So it was fun coming back to that house, and also amazing to see his daughter Stella, who is now a beautiful grown woman who just graduated from Yale University.
All right, here we go. Round 1. Ding, ding.
So we're here in Santa Monica in Simon's place that he lived in for many of the years. I think you were living in Malibu before that, weren't you? I remember going to that place.
We jumped around a little bit, but we got here on I think it was 96 that we arrived in LA. We were in Hollywood, and it didn't take too long to figure that being closer to the beach was going to work more for us. I think actually Becca went out one day. My wife Rebecca Rigg, she had an audition in Santa Monica, and she got home from that audition and she said, "Honey, I found the place where we have to live. People walk around. It's more like Australia." So we ventured out here and rented a little flat in Santa Monica.
Wow. You know, I can't believe that was 96, did you say, that you... Because I remember the first time I met you, you were still doing press for Sweat, but you just moved here, and we met at like the Hollywood 101 cafe.
Oh, really?
Somewhere up near the freeway there, that little...
Yeah.
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 And did a photo shoot with you standing out there in the parking lot.
Oh, really?
And you had a baby, Stella.
Yeah, well, she was 3.
Yeah.
She was 3.
I thought it was amazing that you had, you know, a family and you were coming out here, you know, at that time where a lot of people would only do something like that if they had nothing to lose and it was just them, you know.
Well, I felt like we had nothing to lose. You know, we had each other, and you know, we had a couple of suitcases and you know, a rental car. Actually, we didn't even have a rental car then. We were borrowing. Naomi was away working on a film, and we were staying in her apartment. And then we rented a car. We couldn't afford to do the insurance on it. The rental was set up through Nicole and her business, and then we were like sort of subletting it off them, renting it off them. But it was because we couldn't afford. We didn't have very much money, and we couldn't afford the insurance on it.
Well, I guess it was a lucky thing that when you did rock up here, you did have friends like Nicole Kidman and Naomi Watts, right?
Yeah.
I think Nicole said you'd stayed in their guest house at some point or something.
There was one point when our house was getting... we bought a little house in the Palisades, and it was getting painted or something, or renovated, and we stayed in their guest house. Like we definitely having a couple of friends over here, but not too many. We only had a couple. Their experience of being here, obviously Nicole was really, really established already at that point. But Naomi was still, you know, going from rental apartment to rental apartment and always trying to get someone in it when she was away if she got a job. And so she was still, pushing and working really hard. She hadn't had that kind of breakthrough yet. But it was exciting. It was a really exciting time. And it never felt like it was a risk, or it was more of an adventure, like we'll just see what happens. And I think we had about $2,000. And we'd figured out that could last us. I don't know how we figured this out, but that could last us for a month or 2 months or something if we lived on potatoes and rice with a little 3-year-old. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
life was pretty simple then.
that's true. So how long did that go on before you actually was it LA Confidential? Was that the first thing?
Yeah, that was my first job.
Wow, that's not a bad first job.
Yeah, it was pretty good. And
how long had you been here when that happened?
I thought every movie was going to be like that. I was like, this is great. I love the movie business. I just can't wait to do more of these movies. It premiered at the Grauman's Chinese, and there was a lot of movie stars at the premiere, and they were all sort of singing the film's praises and patting us all on the back. And I thought, oh yeah, this movie business is good. And then the next sort of 3 films I made went straight to video, back when there was video. Yeah.
And it was ironic because Russell was in it as well, Russell Crowe. So
Yeah.
you showed up for your first Hollywood movie with 2 Australians.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
Did you know them?
Yeah, I knew them both, and it was strange because I think also who was the what's his name, lovely actor that was in Babe?
James Cromwell.
James Cromwell, that's right. And because Babe had just come out or been out, everyone thought he was Australian as well. So there's like all these Australians in this film. There was only 3
For a
of us.
classic LA story.
Yeah, so that was my first kind of introduction to it. And I met at the same time. I met with all the networks, and I was also pretty much in the one day I found out about getting that small part in LA Confidential and getting a lead in a TV pilot that didn't get picked up. But
Well, it's okay. You had a few others that did all right.
yeah, eventually, yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning. You grew up in a surfing community, right, in Ballina?
Lennox, Ballina, right, that little area, yeah.
New South Wales, yeah.
Yeah, not particularly known for producing actors, that area.
So when do you remember like having a moment, was it television or film, when you actually made that association of like, I could do this or I want to do this, rather than just watching as a spectator?
There was always, I think from the first time I went to the cinema, that experience of of watching films and being transported away and being able to put yourself into the protagonist, into the lead character. And I thought I'd love to do that. That'd be powerful and fun experience. But I was terrified, and there was and I didn't do drama at school, and there wasn't really that. Actually, there wasn't drama when I was at school. So there wasn't that avenue, there wasn't that approach. And I also thought that I was probably just dreaming, and that most people have that experience when they go to the movies. I just I didn't know what I was going to do when I finished high school, and like a lot of people, I moved to Sydney. My older sister was a doctor, and she had, there was great expectation because from a really blue collar family, a working class family, the fact that she was going to med school was pretty potent, and
That's a lot of pressure.
yeah. So they all kind of looked at me like, what are you going to do? You're going to be a doctor. And I was like, oh, I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew I could leave if I convinced the parental unit that yes, I would go into medicine via nursing, then they would let me leave, because I had to get out of the small town. I really had to get out and go to the city. And then I enrolled with one of my best mates into nursing school, which was just probably the silliest idea in my life. And it's still, I tell people, and it's just like this kind of crazy joke, but I had a good time for a couple of months there.
It was just a couple of months you were doing it.
Yeah.
Were you actually nursing or learning how to nurse?
No, just going I was at nursing
So
college.
they didn't turn you
I didn't
loose
do
on
any
anybody
nursing.
in a hospital.
No, I mean, are you kidding? I still to this day can't watch someone put a needle into. I can't in a film. I can't watch it.
So
2 or 3 months. I
Yep.
can't even remember. I didn't even unregister from the course. I just didn't show up anymore. And then I worked in a pub.
which pub was it?
It was the Regent Hotel in Kingsford.
Oh.
I liked that experience of working in the pub because you saw all different sides of people. That'll be Stella.
Ah,
Stella? Sorry.
it's all right.
We'll just pause game.
Yeah.
Stells? Hi. It's
It's
all right.
okay,
We're just
we're pausing.
Yeah, no, just fidgeting. Where were we?
We
Yeah,
were
no,
talking about the pub and
yeah,
how
I
much
just-
you liked the different sides of.
Yeah, you just saw so much working in a pub, and the pub was sort of 3 blocks from NIDA, and so there was always students coming down to that pub, and NIDA's across the road from New South Wales Uni, so
Yeah.
all these sort of these young, positive, confident people full of hopes and dreams going out and getting educated. And I was sort of working in a pub with this very deep-rooted fantasy about one day maybe being an actor. And I filled out my application for NIDA.
NIDA is the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, for anyone listening that doesn't know.
Yeah.
The premier acting school in Australia, probably. Maybe.
Yeah, who knows? In Sydney, for sure. At the time, absolutely. It's where Judy Davis went and Mel Gibson and all of these people. I never, ever sent it in.
What? You
Because
didn't?
I was too scared. I was just too nervous. And then weirdly, I don't know what happened. I had a bit of a rough time in Sydney when I'd first moved there, and went home and went back to Ballina for a little while and got my head together. 'Cause it was pretty heavy going, moving from the country with all of that space and then being in the thick of it and working at a pub. And I think I was actually working 7 days a week and drinking and all of those things. And I was 18 years old, and your head starts to spin a bit, and just trying to figure out who you are and how you fit into the world and all of those things. And I'm a pretty analytical person, and I kind of had this little breakdown, and went home. Ended up going home, which was good because it just was like this weird reset. And then I went out with a bit, just eased back into things. I moved to the Gold Coast for a while, and then I went back to Sydney. Eventually back to Sydney, and when I was on the Gold Coast, I started doing a couple of commercials and stuff.
So you got an agent at some point to get the commercials, or when was the first time you dipped your toe in actually?
I actually, that was this sort of coincidence that just happened. I was going camping with a guy, and I think you probably heard the story before, but I was going.
Doesn't matter. No one else has heard it.
I was going camping with a guy. We had the car all packed up, and he said, "Oh, look, I just have to stop." It was from the Gold Coast to Brisbane. He said, I've got to stop in for a casting for this commercial. He said, look, you can wait in the car or you can just wait inside. I might be half an hour, And I went and waited inside, and the casting woman came out into the hallway and sort of said, have you signed in? And I said, no, I'm just waiting for my friend who's in there now for this audition. And the woman right there in that moment, and I'd love to know who she was, because I'd like to thank her. she said, why don't you sign in? Why don't you go in and audition? Wow. So I signed in and I went in and auditioned, and then I got that commercial.
Did you beat your friend to that job?
Yeah, I guess I did. But I got cast in that commercial. I think it was for, I can't even remember what it was for. Oh, that's right. It was for Drumstick ice creams.
Oh.
And I remember showing up on the set, and from the moment I showed up on that set and I watched the way a film set, essentially a commercial set, was run and what was going on, from that moment I was fascinated by sets. Separately, to work that day as an actor, I was sitting there and they were like, I got to sort of laze around and eat chocolate drumstick ice creams all day, and I thought, well, this isn't hard. No, I didn't have to fake enjoying it. It was great. It was easy, and I really liked the camaraderie of the crew. I liked that whole energy, and out of that I got an agent and sort of went from there.
So when did you start working on East Street, and then you went East Street, Country Practice, Home and Away, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, 89 to 93 was East Street.
I worked with a guy called Nick Vale, who directed a music video for one of the actors on East Street, right? Because they had like this sort of record thing going on, and he cast me in this music video, and I really enjoyed that process. And I became mates with him, and I said, look, if you want to do any more of these, I'd like to just be your assistant, or like shadow you, step and go fetch it, run around and do everything. And these were really low budget music videos.
So you were interested in filmmaking way back then?
Probably before acting.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So I did assist him, and I, sat through, the conceptual meetings with the music videos, and we did a few together, and through the whole process, post-production, everything, and was in them, and that's where all those videos that they love to show on talk shows come up of me dancing around like some clown. Anyway, I was often in the offices where they made that show, East Street, because I was working with Nick, and Forrest Redlick, who was the producer of the show, his wife suggested that, like, first Tuesday of every month they had an open casting session, and Lisa Redlick suggested that I audition for the show in the open casting thing, and I was like, okay. So I auditioned, and then they wrote me a character.
So they wrote that character for you?
Yeah, they wrote that character for me. So that was the beginning of me working as an actor. And I ran off. I got the job, and I ran off, and I did like a 2-week short course at NIDA. So I did go to NIDA eventually for 2 weeks, and I paid for it though. And I did a few acting classes here and there, but pretty much just learnt on the job.
There's so many people that have come from that background in Australia who have done really well overseas. Mm-hmm. Is it because you're just working all the time and you get really a lot of experience, or what do you think it is about those shows that give people that kind of?
Well, there's a lot of characters in them, and then there's a lot of turnover. So it's sort of a place to be. To get blooded into the industry, to cut your teeth, to figure it out. I mean, the quantity of what they produce is massive. So there's such an incredible turnover. You have to figure it out pretty quickly, because before you've got a chance to even sort of figure out if it works on the page, it's already been shot. It's that quick. So you do get, I guess you do develop a work ethic, and it's remarkable how many people have come through those shows. At the time, there wasn't the content that there is now, anywhere near the content, because we we only had, you know, what is it, 4 stations or something?
Yep.
4 TV stations.
What, 7, 9, 10 and ABC, right?
That was it.
Yeah.
So there wasn't enormous amount of opportunity in Australia other than those shows. And I think that's probably why there's so many people that have come through those shows.
I always ask everybody this in the podcast, but, you know, you guys sort of you were in a previous wave where there weren't as many and it was a little tougher.
Mm-hmm.
Now it seems like every morning, every Qantas flight, there's another person that's getting off the plane that is, you know, very likely probably going to work. Do you have any other theories about what it is about Australian actors that it's an unusually high number for such a small country and small acting community to make it in the most competitive place in the world?
I certainly think that there's been enough Australians that have come through that have been proven to be successful that there's at this point now that we've reached a point where there's an expectation that they're going to be reasonably good and they have a good work ethic and they like to have a good time. So I don't know which one should be at the top of that list in order.
It's probably a combination.
It varies.
Because people like the work ethic and they like knowing that they're going to have a good time.
Yeah, that it's not always going to be, that it's not going to be fraught. But we've got the momentum now with enough people that have come across and achieved a level of success. So there is that expectation, I think, when people meet Australians within our industry. For me, there was just a lot of gratitude in particular with having opportunity that wasn't there in Australia. So to come over here and see the opportunity, it does inspire you. It does give you hope and it does give you a confidence, because we didn't have that. That opportunity wasn't available. They weren't making a lot of Australian films, and at the time they were making a fair few American films in Australia with sort of B-grade American actors in the main roles, and then they'd fill up all of the supporting roles with really great Australian actors. And if you could get a gig in there, then that was fine. But I was just a sort of this kid that had come along through soap, so I wasn't taken seriously as an actor. You know, and I remember going to the premiere of Muriel's Wedding and sitting there, and you know, I really enjoyed the movie, and I thought, oh, this is kind of great. And we were in Muriel's sister's bedroom, and she's on the bed, and there's this scene, and her bedroom wall is adorned with posters, pin-ups, and I was one of the pin-ups.
Oh,
and
I never noticed that.
Behind her head from sort of like TV Hits magazine or something like that. And it was such a sad, I was like, ah. And I remember my wife elbowed me back and she goes, "You're in the movie." I was like, yeah, not quite the way I wanted to be in it, but... But there was that stigma at that time. There was, particularly in Australia, it was like, well, there was, you know, you're a soap actor, you're a theatre actor, and you're a film actor. And at that time, the boundaries between those different areas hadn't broken down like they had. I mean, now there's no real sort of stigma associated with doing TV at all.
So in a way, going to LA was not as risky as it sounded, because you could reinvent yourself. Like, people didn't see you as the soap guy when you came to LA, right? No,
that's right. Like, yeah, I came over here and it said on my resume that I'd won a Logie. And they were like, wow, you won something. Americans love it when you win something. It's fantastic. It's like, yeah, I did win something. So it was like a fresh start, but I guess that wasn't at the forefront of my mind. It was just that there was so much more opportunity. And part of what, because you mentioned earlier, like that must have been sort of terrifying, arriving here with a young child. And I felt like I had a safety net because I could always go back to, you know, one of those 4 soap operas in Australia and just make a living.
Right. Well, we should actually bring up Rebecca at this point, because She's been mentioned by Ben Mendelsohn and a few people as sort of like a really great sort of glue for an LA, sort of an Aussie community in LA. She's been really, and I know she's been very supportive of your career. She was an actress first, I think. Was she when you met her?
Yeah. Yeah, she did. Rebecca did. Her first job was a little movie when she was 11 called Fatty Finn. She was great in it, really good, and she was really motivated as a child to be an actor. So when I first met her and I got this job on E Street, she was always great. Like, you don't want to do this, be careful of that. They're going to make you try and do this. So she sort of protected me in a lot of ways from her experiences in the industry. And really a large part of us coming over to the States was motivated by Beck, because she'd gotten a bit of traction on a couple of different Hollywood movies where they started sort of casting the net a bit wider and coming to Australia and seeing actors from Australia for certain movies. So she came down to the wire on a couple of big American projects before we got here. So she was like the focus.
Wow.
Of why we came over here.
And she had gone to school with Nicole Kidman, right?
That's right.
The two of them had known each other since school. So
during high school, they were both going off to do films, and so that's how their bond started.
It's so lovely that Nicole could be here and sort of help make a little bit of it a little easier for you guys, in some ways when you got here.
Also, just an ear. You could talk to them about stuff, and and she would have, an understanding of experiences that was way beyond anything that we'd experienced before. And she's also a very positive person, Nicole, and quite brave. Like, she's not afraid to take risks. She was super supportive.
But then after LA Confidential, did you guys discuss the focus changing, or it just became sort of a natural ebb when you had more kids? And
it just went that way. Becca worked on a couple of different jobs, television jobs. We had another child, then we had another one, and as the family grew and developed, that became a bigger priority. She encouraged me to keep working. That just kept sort of happening and flowing. And you go from renting a house and you buy a little house, and the next thing you know, before you know it, you're sort of established. And coming over here for potentially 2 months, if everything went south, we ended up here for 20 odd years. So
wow.
It just sort of developed, as your life does. It sort of starts taking over, and something beautiful about that.
Before you were cast in The Guardian, your first big hit TV show, you had a bunch of great movies. You did, Judas Kiss, Ride with the Devil, Red Planet, Affair of the Necklace. I mean, you sort of really got around, and of course, and The Devil Wears Prada, of course, I suppose was...
That was later, I think.
Was it later?
I think that was after The Guardian. I'm not sure. But yeah,
no, you're right. That was 2006.
I did a bunch of movies.
Yeah. I remember I was on the set of Ang Lee's movie, Ride with the Devil, and you were all that group with Toby Maguire and
Jeffrey.
Skeet Ulrich and everybody.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time with Jeffrey Wright on that movie. He's a great guy.
It looked like a really wonderful experience.
That was, those sort of experiences are the dream experiences. And I look back and you don't get too many that are like that. I bounced all over the place. A lot of the jobs that I had to choose, there was always things to weigh up, which was how much time away from the family. Can I bring the whole family? Is it going to be easy to manage? As far as the trajectory of my career, in a lot of ways, it was a lot of times it was like one step forward and 2 steps back, or because I had to work when I needed to work, to provide, and I couldn't, and that was a difference that I saw with, some people that came over and they were on their own. They had the luxury of being able to hold out for certain stuff because they were only really looking after themselves. But that's okay because it's sort of, I had a very rich experience being able to raise a family within this profession and still for so many years of it be pretty close to the bone on a lot of it. So those experiences are really quite potent for my kids.
Right.
As well as for Beck and I. And Beck was always incredibly supportive, but it was challenging. And then that was when the kids were starting to, go into school, things shifted because I couldn't just take them. I mean, we were like gypsies. We used to be able to just pack up and go. And that's when I thought, well, the only way I can continue to do this is if I do a TV show.
And lucky at that time there were a lot of shows filming in LA. Now that would not even be as likely that you'd end up in LA, right?
That was also that was a pretty clear...
it had to be in LA.
It had to be in LA. And then, The Guardian came along.
It was a great show, and I think Dabney Coleman must have been a great mentor in a lot of ways for you, sort of stepping into an environment like that with somebody who had just done so much in his career, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's a great human. Like, he's a real character. If I look back at that show, it should have been on cable. I mean, it would, if you look at the stuff that's on cable and streaming now, with the premise
Could have been FX or something.
Yeah, the premise of what that show was really would have worked quite well. It struggled, I think, on network television because the content standards and practices, they had to reduce the level of where we wanted to go and where it probably should have gone, given the subject matter of a drug-addicted corporate lawyer.
Right, yeah.
It's kind of an anti-hero character, and there wasn't a lot on TV at the time.
Right. But that was your first Golden Globe nomination. I remember that night. And it was quite a funny night being at the Golden Globes because I think Naomi was presenting, Russell was nominated, you were nominated. I think Nicole was either presenting or nominated, but and Hugh Jackman was nominated. And it was like the first time that
I do remember it's like socialising afterwards and there being so many of us all together, which was cool.
Yeah, I have a great picture I'll have to send to you guys of me and Deborah Lee and Rebecca and Nicole and Naomi all sitting at a table that night together, and it was like, wow. And at that time I thought we'll always have these nights, but you don't realise the chances of you all being in the same room again.
They're moments. They're just moments, and you kind of gotta lean into those moments when they're happening because you can't take any of that for granted. It all goes. It all shifts and it all changes, and I remember those little things quite fondly. That was fun, that show. It was hard. It was really hard. It was the first time that I worked those kind of hours. I mean, the first year I worked every day. We were doing sometimes 17, 18-hour days. It was hard, and we had a young baby. Harry was born during that show, and Claude was, a year and a half. So young children, and it took its toll. But I learnt a lot on that show, and I learnt how to, if I was to ever do TV again, how to approach it and how to structure it so that I can look after myself a little bit better, and because I used to have a tendency of sort of putting my own needs last, and I would wear myself right down.
Well, then you obviously got a chance to learn to put that into practice when you did the Mentalist.
Yeah, so I finished the show, and
I think you had like a 4-year gap between those two shows.
Yeah,
right?
I did a couple of films, bounced around.
You did The Ring too with Naomi.
I did do The Ring too.
Which must have been funny getting to work on that with her.
Yeah, it was funny. That was a bit bizarre. I took a year off in there somewhere. I'd sort of had enough. We bought a little house and I was renovating the house. So I just took a year off and did construction around the house, which is great. And then I got a phone call from a friend of mine, Ted Griffin, a writer, and he was working with Martin Scorsese on this Carver champagne commercial in New York.
Oh, I remember.
That was this 15-minute short film commercial, and he said, Ted calls me up and said, I've mentioned you to Marty to do this thing, and would you be interested? And it was a Hitchcock homage thing, and I said, of course I'd be interested. So I haven't worked for about 10 months.
And did you say, like, Marty knows who I am?
I knew that Ted had mentioned me to Marty. I thought Marty wouldn't have known who I was. Ted was just pushing it. And I thought, so you're saying that you told Marty about me, Marty Scorsese about me? And he went, yeah, he's interested. He wants to, I think he wants to cast you. I was like, oh, okay. All right, great. And then the funny thing happened is I was cleaning up from a kid's birthday party that we'd had in the backyard, and there was, in a concrete tub, there was a bunch of sodas in bottles that I was picking up, and I dropped the bottle, it hit the edge of the concrete, and it exploded, and it cut the front of my leg, like a big deep gash in the front of my leg, and I stepped back on the bottom of the bottle, and it went through my foot.
Oh.
Right? And Beck took me down to emergency, and they stitched me up, and stitched up the bottom of my foot. But I basically, both legs were injured, and Marty Scorsese just cast me in this thing, and I could barely walk. And I was on crutches, and I went out there, and I didn't know whether I should tell them, and I was strapping my foot up, and, so I nearly lost that little job. And that little job was really just an opportunity because I was such a fan.
And you learned a lot, I'm sure.
And I had it, yeah. And, it sort of changed my whole perspective. That weird little job changed my whole perspective on my approach to the things that give me joy in this business. And at that moment, I knew that I was going to make a film. Because Marty could tell that I was interested. He could see, and what is fantastic about Martin Scorsese is that he's an incredible teacher, and he sees and he can see when you're interested. So he just he was so generous with his time and so generous with his thoughts and ideas and his knowledge. And it just inspired me, and I carried a lot of that experience with me from that point on, and it also made me go back and look at all of the different experiences that I've had and start to sort of analyse them and kind of make these mental textbooks out of each experience so that I can carry those with me into the future to avoid problems and issues. And
Did you direct on The Guardian or just started on The Mentalist?
I did.
So
on
the
The
first
Guardian.
time was on The Guardian.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And you knew, obviously, the moment you did that's what you wanted to keep doing, right?
Yeah. Well, I knew before I even started directing.
Yeah.
I knew when I would sit there and on a set as an actor, I always knew I wanted to be directing. It was just about trying to...
That must have been hard then, watching other directors come in every week, because directors on TV at that time were sort of just a job for hire one week to the next, right? And this is your
It was hard.
character in your life, right?
It was hard, and I wasn't always polite about it. I gave a lot of directors a hard time. I just sort of did. I couldn't handle. There's two things that always used to upset me. One was I couldn't handle when people hadn't thought about stuff and weren't prepared, and that was the first thing. And then the other thing that I would always get into arguments about was when writers or directors would underestimate the intelligence of the audience. And I felt that it was almost like an insult to me because I'm an audience as well. Yeah. And it always annoyed me. And so I'd go into battle a lot for that.
Well, but the good thing about The Mentalist was also it was such a big hit. It was 7 seasons.
7 seasons.
7
years,
seasons. And I think it had a pretty big global reach. That must have felt really good for you in terms of, a show that you were so invested in.
Yeah, it was weird. I had to go in and out of, hotels in Paris through the laundry shoot and that sort of stuff.
Really?
Yeah, it was bizarre. It was really strange. Funny though, I saw the fun in it.
So now let's
It's also nice with the French to walk into a restaurant and then will want to give you a great seat.
Yeah, it's nice that the French are nice to you.
Yeah, I like the French.
And they like you. So
Might be something to do with it.
that brings us to Breath. And
Yeah.
I wonder, you discovered this project. I mean, you already read it. For people who aren't Australian, it's based on a Tim Winton novel, and Tim Winton is, one of our beloved writers who's just written so many great books. This had a surfer character, and it was slightly coming of age. You can describe it better than I can, but at what point while you were making The Mentalist did it just came to you as a book first, or?
Yeah, well, Mark Johnson, who was an executive producer on The Guardian, actually, that's where I met Mark, and we'd stayed in touch. He had read the book and he sent it to me whilst I was on the set of The Mentalist.
Well, that's funny. So you're the American producer of
Yeah.
read the book, and you were like, I don't know this book.
No, I'd heard about the book, but I hadn't read it. And then he said, look, I got a chance. There's a possibility that I can get the option for it. I thought of you when I read it. Maybe you'd be interested in producing it with me and playing Sando. And so I read the book. It was how I grew up. So I knew all of those characters. So I knew them all very with great detail, and they were also clear in me in so many ways. So those characters were characters that sort of helped form who I am as a person. And I read it and immediately called him and said, yeah, I'm in. I don't know how we're going to make it into a film because it's almost impossible to shoot that. But I'm definitely in. And that was not for me to direct it at that point.
Did you think that to yourself, though?
Yes, I did, but I was terrified of voicing it,
So you were just sort of going along with Mark. Who shall we get to direct this?
It's also one of those things, and this is true for me throughout my whole career. It's like I feel like I've got to sort of fight for something. If I don't fight for it, I don't trust that it's any good. It's this weird sort of sensation. It's like it's like any job that gets offered to me, the first few times I actually just got offered jobs straight up, I was always like, that must be shit. They must be crap. Well, why would they offer it to me? So
Good thing it wasn't Titanic.
No, I know. Oh, don't worry. I could have. There's been plenty of jobs that I have sort of misstepped on for sure. Because I don't know. I just didn't. I had my head up my ass or something. I don't know.
Do you want to tell us any of them?
Oh no, nah. There's. I think every actor probably has them. Yeah. They're there. The ones that got away. That's just the landscape changes as you go, and the view of the landscape changes as you grow, and I was at a certain point that I made certain decisions. I still grew in a way, like my film resume as an actor. It's not something that I'm particularly proud of. As far as the quality of work, there's some good stuff in there, here and there, some good moments. Excuse me, but that doesn't diminish any of those experiences for me, because that's what I carry, not the end result, not how the film works out, but what that experience was. And even if it was a negative experience, there was always going to be something positive that comes out of that negative experience. The truth is, I understand that now. At the time, you're so sort of passionate and heated about trying to kind of claw your way up what you think is a ladder that isn't really there.
Yeah.
But you think it's a ladder, and it's sold to you by the machine of what Hollywood is as a ladder. You know, you socialise and people are like, hey, what are you up to? You know, and if you don't say, if I said, well, I've actually just been trimming my roses, and I painted the front of the house, they're like, what? They don't care about what you've been up to. They don't care about they just care about what opportunities you've had that they could potentially exploit, right? There's always a little bit of piggybacking here, leapfrogging up along ladders and all of that stuff. And that's where my wife has been incredibly powerful in my career, in the sense that she's always kind of shaken me up about, this is what's real. This is all good, that's all great, but this is what's real. And I think not just Beck, but I think that's also my kind of regional upbringing in Australia, where your friends tend to treat you,
keep you grounded
for who you are, not what you've done necessarily.
Yeah.
For who you are and how you react in any moment or situation, as opposed to the body of work.
I think that's a very Australian thing just in general too. Like even the Australians that have, Nicole and Hugh and people like that, that you don't see that. People think they're great, but it's because it's not that they had to fight not having an ego. It's just not innately an Australian thing that you get carried away with it all. So how long was the process from the time you and Mark decided that you would direct it? You were still then working on The Mentalist, so then you realised we have to wait till the show's over. Yeah,
so we started talking about development of the script, and then we talked about different directors, and obviously I wanted it to be an Australian director, and we met with a bunch of them. All of the guys. I think the first person we met with was David Michaud. His film had just played. We met with him the morning after his film had just won the award at Sundance.
Animal Kingdom, yeah.
And he wasn't there, but we sat down, and in hindsight, that meeting, his head was spinning and he had no idea what he wanted to do or what was going to happen. And then at a certain point, Mark said, why, after a meeting, he said, has it occurred to you that you should direct this film? And I said, why do you say that? And he said, because you talk about this film as the director. I said, of course it's occurred to me. I'd be terrified directing it, but I think because Mark suggested it, it validated it for me. If I'd said straight off the bat, you know what, Mark, I think I should direct this movie, I don't know if I would have had the momentum behind me and the confidence to keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
And Mark was fantastic throughout the journey. He wasn't overly involved in my process, but he was always there as a support and always available to talk to and communicate with if I had doubts about certain things or mainly doubts about myself.
As a director or an actor?
No, as a director. I mean, just with the responsibility.
So who did the actor talk to when they had doubts?
The actor's so used to being alone, it's fine. That's fine. It's just the energy that's exhausting.
Well, that's, I talked to Mel Gibson recently, and he said that Braveheart almost killed him and that he never, ever was in a movie he directed again after that. And I just wondered what that experience was like.
Well, I hadn't done it any other way. So I'd only been able to take advantage of opportunities of TV shows that I was number one on the call sheet, so I got the chance to direct them in the first place, and that no one was going to really mess with me too much with what I wanted to do, so I got to explore a little bit more. So I hadn't done it any other way, so I thought, this is fine, it'll be fine. But the truth is, towards the end of that film, when I had my last day as an actor, it was a really nice feeling not having to go to hair and makeup in the morning and put a costume on and just go straight and know that I was just going to be completely behind the camera. It was a really nice feeling.
It's such a beautiful film, and for people listening, especially if you're in the US, you need to go find Breath and go see it. But also the validation that you have now that you've toured the whole of Australia, you've been to New York. Many people have now seen the film. Mm-hmm. What does it feel like to be at the other end of the journey?
I feel that those moments when I first saw movies and I sat there and I watched and there was a purity to the exchange that happened between me as an audience member and what was happening on the screen, and the language of cinema. I feel like that purity is kind of come to the forefront again, and it's sort of, it feels like a rebirth of some sort, some way, because I feel fresh again, like I've come out of, like shed my skin. But to see a film being witnessed by an audience, and I still watch whenever I do these screenings now, the Q&As and stuff, I come in and watch the last sort of 5-10 minutes, because the experience of feeling the audience connected to the film is, it's beautiful. It's great.
Can I quickly ask you before we wrap up? I didn't know you'd done another movie, but I noticed you had a movie called Blue Night with Renee Zellweger, Sarah Jessica Parker, Taylor Kinney and Jacqueline Bisset. That's a pretty good cast. When did you do that?
I just snuck that one in, I think it was the end of summer last year.
Yeah?
Yeah. It was just after I'd finished completed Breath, and it's just one of those little easy jobs, a couple of days.
Where did you shoot?
New York.
Ah.
Yeah. I forgot about it until I got some notification that it was going to the Tribeca Film Festival. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I did a little movie, because the Breath has taken up so much of my life.
But you just wanted to do something else just for a little bit to kind
of... it was really good going to a set where I was just like a tourist coming in.
Is it a comedy?
No, it's not a comedy.
Oh.
And then
you make
leave.
it sound so enjoyable.
No, but I love the set.
Yeah.
This is my experience of it, and for me, the film's the byproduct. Yeah. The experience on the set is, for me, where it's at.
So you've worked in Australia. Where do you see yourself going now? Do you want to direct in America and Australia? Do you want to do TV again? Do you want to keep acting as well as directing?
I really loved being back in Australia, and I really like... I've always felt connected to the Australian film industry. It didn't embrace me when I lived there as a young actor, but I always aspired to make Australian films. The irony is my first Australian film was the one that I directed. Wow. So, which is kind of strange. There's a sense of pride in Australian stories and the Australian identity in whatever form it takes, because it's a multicultural nation, and it's a nation that has always sort of struggled with its identity over the years. I feel pretty strongly about making films there and continuing to try to help articulate who we are to us Australians, right, but also internationally, and there's great opportunity, and I'm prepared to commit to nurturing that. I want to keep doing stuff that I feel stimulated creatively and I feel alive when I'm doing, because then it's not work, then it's just joy and there's love in it, and I have to feel that love.
And acting as well, without directing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally continue
I
that.
I need to feel that. I spent a lot of years where I worked as a provider, and that was my focus. Now I want to work for my soul.
Wow. So can you give us any hints about what you're thinking about doing next?
I'm supposed to.
You know what? I could cut it out if it
no.
ends up not
Well,
being-
I'm thinking. I'm thinking very strongly about doing this. Doing this film in northwest Arnhem Land later on in the year, which
Wow.
is, it's a risky film. It's a difficult film to make. It's going to be in some insanely remote country where a lot of white fellas have never been before. So there's a lot in the logistics of organising and pulling this thing together, but just to act in it. But it's a big risk, and it's one of those things that I have to continually remind myself that it's the experience that's going to be the thing that'll sit with me and not necessarily the result, because there's always going to be a risk with any film that you make that it will turn out or it won't turn out. All that stuff I said about experience before. In this situation, I probably just have to put my money where my mouth is and back that and go and have this incredible experience.
Well, thank you so much for all your time. And it's lovely seeing you over the years grow and change and just being where you are now. I'm really happy for you.
Thanks, Jen.
All right. Bye.
Oof.
I'm so thrilled that Simon has had such a great reception to his movie Breath, both critically and at the box office. I think the sky's the limit for him now that he's proven himself as a talented filmmaker. And as I mentioned earlier, Breath is based on a book by Tim Winton. And if you'd like to hear Tim Winton in his own words talking, check out the podcast Be a Man on podcast1.com.au. I'm also pleased to report that Simon now has his own passion fruit vine growing in Australia. That's it until next time on Aussies in Hollywood. Aussies in Hollywood is presented by me, Jenny Cooney, and produced in collaboration with Podcast One Australia. Executive producer is Jenny Goggin. For more episodes, go to podcast1.com.au, download the app,